you didn't review the case study doc, now would be a good time to do so since we're ready to jump into the modeling. And so the first thing that we're going to do is rename this tab by using the shortcut Alt-HOR, and we'll rename this to case study. And so we have that. Next, what we'll do is we'll get rid of these grid lines using Alt-WVG, and now we have the grid lines removed. And then the next thing that we'll do is we'll make a cosmetic change here, and we'll change column A's width using the shortcut Alt-HOW. We'll make this a column width of 2 and then hit enter, and so we have that. Now we're ready to start laying out our assumptions. So starting in cell B2, we'll type in property description. And then here we'll have the property type, and then building rentable square footage. And that's all the information we're going to have in this table. We see that the contents from column B2 is spilling over into column C. So we'll hold down Control and Spacebar to select the whole column, and then Alt-HOI to auto-fit the column contents. So we have that. Now we can input the assumptions. So the first thing that we have is the property type. So here we'll make note of that. And this is a retail property. We'll right align this using Alt-HAR. And then we know from the case study document that the building rentable square footage is 40,000 square feet. And so we'll include that there. And because we're using best modeling practices here, we need to show these as blue font since these are hard-coded assumptions. And so what we'll do here is we'll select these two cells and then Alt-HFC and then M. We'll go over to custom here, and the color code that we want is 0 for red, 0 for green, and then for blue, it'll be 255. Then we can hit enter, and now we have our hard codes correctly color formatted. Now we can format the property description. So here, we never want to merge and center. What we're going to do here is select column cell B2 and C2, and then Control 1. We'll choose this alignment tab here, click the horizontal drop down and select center across selection, and then click OK. And so there we have the property description is now centered across these two cells. And so now we'll format our header. So here we'll say Alt-HBS, and then we have that. We'll add a fill color here. And so to add a fill color, we'll use the shortcut Alt-HHM. And then we'll choose custom here, and the color code that we want here is going to be 157 for the red value. We can hit tab to navigate to the next option, which is the green value. Here we'll have 180, and then tab again for the final option, which is the blue number that we have, and that's going to be 202. We can hit enter, and then we see that the fill color has updated. Now we will bold this using Control B, and then Alt-HFC to change the font color, and we'll make this white. So we have that. Now we can format the rest of the table using Alt-HBS to add borders around here, and then Alt-HBS here. And the last thing we'll do here is add some fill color around these line items. So Alt-HH, and we'll select this shade of gray. That's it for the property description. And so now we'll be using this formatting throughout the rest of the model. We'll copy this table and we'll paste this below. And now we'll delete everything here and we'll rename this to purchase assumptions. So we have that as our header. Now we're going to have the acquisition price here, and then we'll have acquisition closing costs as well. We'll say Alt-HBN here to get rid of the bottom border, and then we'll drag these two cells down using Control D. And then finally, we'll have the going in cap rate, which is one of the metrics we need to calculate to complete this case study. We have some spillover again, so Control Spacebar, Alt-HOI, and now we have the column contents auto-fitted. Alt-HBO to add a bottom border here, and now let's input the assumptions. So the acquisition price is going to be $11,500,000. So we have that. The acquisition closing cost will be 3%. And we need to reformat this. So we'll use Control Shift and then the 5 key where you see the percentage symbol. and now that's reformatted as a percentage. To add decimal places, we can use the shortcut Alt H0 and then Alt H0 again, and there we have the acquisition closing costs. For the going in cap rate, we can't calculate this yet since we need net operating income, and so we'll leave this blank for now. Let's copy the purchase assumptions table using Control C, and then we can use the Enter key just to paste everything here. And we'll delete everything from this table, and we'll rename this to sale assumptions. In our sale assumptions table, we're going to have the exit cap rate, we're going to have sale closing costs, and then we're going to have the exit year. The exit cap rate is going to be 9.5%. Sale closing cost will be equal to 3% of the sales price. And then the exit year is going to be year 10. So we have that. Now we can move on to revenue assumptions. So let's copy just the first 3 rows of this table and paste this down. We'll delete everything here and input the revenue assumptions. So we'll call this revenue assumptions. The first line item that we're going to have in this table is going to be in-place gross rents. And then the assumption is $32 per square foot. And so we have that. Next, we have the expense reimbursement, which is equal to 50% of the expenses. So we have that. We'll drag this down 2 more rows, and then while we're at it, Alt HBO to add a bottom border, and we'll delete everything here. Next is the stabilized vacancy assumption, and that's 5%. And then we have the annual rent escalations as well, which is 3%. So expenses will be increasing 3% per year. That's it for the revenue assumptions. Let's copy this table again, and we'll paste this down below, delete everything, and now we'll input the expense assumptions. So here we have the operating expenses. We have the insurance costs. We have property taxes. And then we have the annual expense escalation. So I'll just copy this line item, and then I will change the name to annual expense escalations. Alt HOI here to auto fit, and that looks good. The operating expenses is $11 per square foot. The insurance is $2.25 per square foot. And we need to change that formatting. So Control Shift and the 4 key will re-input the assumption 2.25. And so now we have that. That's the expenses, that's the insurance assumption. And then for property taxes, we have $4.50. Control C and then Alt EST to paste special the formatting here. And then we'll type in the number again since Excel is still reading that as a percentage when it converts. So 4.5, and now it's fixed. Let's copy the first 4 rows of this table since we're done here. We'll paste this below, and now we'll input the financing assumptions. We'll delete everything here. Here we're going to have the LTV. Then we're going to have the interest rate on the loan. We're going to have the loan term. Then we'll have the amortization. Then we'll drag this down as well, which is our final row, Alt HBO, add that border, and then we have the origination fee. The LTV, as we know, is going to be 70%. So the loan will be 70% of the property value. The interest rate is 6.5%. The loan term, also known as the maturity, is going to be 10 years. We'll get rid of the $ holding down Control Shift 1, and then Alt H9, and then Alt H9 again to get rid of the decimal places. The amortization is how long it will take us to pay off the loan if we were making all payments on time. And so the assumption for this case study is 25 years. So we'll put that there. Let's get rid of the $ again by copying here and then Alt EST to paste that formatting. And then lastly, the origination fee is 1%. And so we have that. And since we have just a little bit of a teaching point here, since the amortization exceeds the loan term, also known as the maturity, and I'll make note of that here, we know we're going to have a bullet payment, also known as a balloon payment. That means we'll have an unpaid, a large chunk of the loan will have to be paid back once its maturity date is hit. So now, with all of the assumptions laid out, we're now ready to begin making some calculations, and that's going to be in our sources and uses table. So we'll copy the financing assumptions that we have here, and we'll paste this below, just the header, and we'll rename this to sources and uses. We'll drag these two cells down, so that way we bring the formatting down, and we'll rename this to just sources. We'll select these two cells and Alt-HH to make this gray, and then Alt-HFC to change the font color to black, so we have that. And our sources in this deal will be nice and simple. We'll have debt, and then we'll have equity. And then we want the total for this, so we'll have a summation line, and we'll call this total sources, like so. Now Alt-HBD to add a top and a bottom border, and then Alt-HBS to add a border around that. We can bold everything here using Control B and then Alt-HH, and we'll use this shade of blue here. That's it for the sources side. We'll copy everything here, we'll paste it below, and now we'll do the uses side. We'll rename this to uses. We need an additional row here, so a nice and easy way to do that is hold down Shift in the spacebar, and then Control Shift in the plus sign to add another row. So we have that. We can delete everything here and input our uses. So in this deal, we have the acquisition price. We know we have the closing costs associated with acquiring the property. And then finally, we have this origination fee that's associated with the loan. And then our summation line will be total uses, and so we'll type that in here. Now we can start filling out the table, starting off with the uses side. So the acquisition price, we have that in the purchase assumptions table, 11.5 million, so we'll link to there. Acquisition closing cost, this is the first calculation in the model. So we'll take the acquisition price and multiply by the acquisition closing cost, which is 3%. And we'll get rid of these decimal places using Alt-H9 and then Alt-H9 again. The origination fee we won't calculate yet since we need to calculate the debt amount. And so here, to calculate the total uses, we'll use the shortcut Alt equals equals, and we have our total uses calculated, albeit without the origination fee. To calculate the debt amount, we'll take the LTV and multiply by the purchase price, the acquisition price that we have here. And so our loan is that 8 million figure. And then to calculate equity, what we'll do is we'll take the total uses and we'll deduct the debt. Total sources, Alt equals equals is our shortcut. And so we have total sources equal to total uses, but we're not done yet because now we can calculate the origination fee since we have the debt calculated. So the origination fee is going to be the debt amount times the origination fee assumption, which we have right here in the financing assumptions table. We hit enter and then Alt-H9, Alt-H9 again. There's our origination fee. We have total sources equal to total uses, and so we're all set there. Now we're ready to begin building out the pro forma. So starting off in column D, Alt-HOW here, and we'll set this to a column width of 2 and hit enter. And then here in cell E2, we'll start creating the timeline. And so this is an annual model, so this will be nice and simple. We'll type in the word year here. And then in column F, we'll have 0. And then in all of the future columns, or at least the next 11 of them, we'll add 1. We can drag this formula to the right, selecting our cells, and then Control R. And we need 1 more year, so Control R 1 more time. And now we're going out 11 years. And even though we're selling the property in year 10, we'll be calculating the sale proceeds based on forward NOI, so that's why we have year 11 here. I know we're going to need more space here, so Alt HOW here in column E, and we'll set this to a value of 30. And then for the subsequent columns, Alt HOW here, and then a column width of 15. And so now, Control Shift right arrow key, Alt HBO to add a bottom border, Alt HH to add a fill color. We'll choose the shade of blue. Control B to bold, and then we will change the font color using Alt HFC for font color, selecting white, and now that's nice and polished and good to go. Let's copy this timeline, and we'll paste below, and then we'll delete everything here because we'll use this and call this our revenue schedule. So the first thing that we're going to do is change this fill color using Alt HH, and we'll select this light gray option. And then we will type in revenues here. And of course we can't see that. Let's change the font color, Alt HFC, and set that to black. So now we're ready to start creating our pro forma. So here we'll have potential gross income. And this is the income that we expect the property to generate based on achieving all the market rents and full occupancy. So to calculate this, we'll take the building rentable square footage, and we have that here, and we'll multiply it by the in-place gross rents assumption, which we have here in the revenue assumptions table. We'll hit enter, and there we have our potential gross income in the acquisition year. So that's year 0. Alt H9 and then Alt H9 again to get rid of those decimal places. And now we can project this potential gross income. So to do this, we'll take the potential gross income and we'll multiply by, in parentheses, 1 plus the annual rent escalation assumption, which we have here in cell C20, and we'll use F4 to lock in the cell here, and then close parentheses. And we absolutely need the parentheses here. We need to keep order of operations here. So what we're doing here is we're taking this potential gross income amount in year 0 and multiplying by 1 plus 3%, or in other words, 1.03, and that will grow our potential gross income, and we see that it has increased year over year. Let's get rid of the decimal places using Control C here, and then Alt EST, open up Paste Special. Alt ES will open up Paste Special. If I select T here, that will select that format option, and I know that due to this underline here, I can click OK. And now we can drag this across all the way out to year 11. So we have that. Now the next line item that we're going to have is expense reimbursements. And so we'll type that in here. And that looks good. We won't be able to calculate this yet since we haven't projected out expenses yet, and we'll need expenses to project this, so we'll leave this blank for now. The next line item that we're going to have is going to be vacancy, and that we can project. So we'll type an equal sign, and we'll take the negative of the potential gross income in the same year, and then we'll multiply by the stabilized vacancy assumption, which is here in cell C19, and we need to lock in this cell using the F4 key since we want to keep our cell reference on this cell. We'll hit enter, and we have the right value here, but we'll reformat this using Control Shift and the 4 key, and then Alt H9 again to get rid of those decimal places. We'll navigate up to potential gross income, Control right arrow key to jump down to the end of our schedule, and then Control Shift left arrow key, and then Control right to drag this formula across without having to tap the right arrow key. It's just a little bit of it's more of an efficient way to navigate through the spreadsheet. And so we have that. Now our summation line here is going to be effective gross income. So we'll type that in here. And we'll call this EGI. So to format this, we'll bold this. We'll select everything here. Alt HH. We'll select the shade of blue, and then for vacancy, Control Shift right arrow key, and then Alt HBO here to add a bottom border. Effective gross income is going to be the sum of these 3 line items, and so we'll type in equals sum, select that range, and then hit enter. Control B to bold this, and now we can drag this across. So now we have effective gross income calculated, and it's helpful, though this isn't explicitly asked in the case study. Whenever I project pro formas, I like to show certain metrics. And so here we're going to calculate the percentage growth year over year. So we'll type that in here and we'll do some formatting. So first things first, Control I to italicize this, just to add a little bit of a distinction between the rest of the pro forma, and then Alt H6 will indent it. And so we have that. Now to calculate the percentage growth, what we'll do is we'll take the year one effective gross income and divide by the effective gross income in year zero. So the current year that we're in divided by the previous year, and then we'll subtract 1. And this will give us the percentage growth. We hit enter, we see that it's 0.03. This corresponds to 3%. So we'll just reformat this using Control Shift and the 5 key, and then Alt H0 and Alt H0 again. So now we have the percentage growth calculated year over year. Control I here to italicize this, and that's all we need to do. Let's navigate down to the end of the schedule and then drag this across. And so the percentage growth is 3%, and that corresponds to this annual rent escalation. If I change this to 5%, because we're building this model nice and dynamic, we can change this to, let's say, 8%, and the model updates accordingly. We'll set this back to 3%, and we'll keep knocking out this case study. So now that we have the revenue schedule almost completed, that's all we can do for now. We're ready to move on to the expenses schedule. And so to save us a chunk of time, we'll copy this entire schedule, and we will paste it below here, and we'll delete everything here. We'll title this expenses, since this is our expenses schedule, and then I'll just scroll over so we can see the assumptions as well. So we have 3 types of expenses here: operating expenses, insurance, and property taxes. So Control C, and then Alt ESV. Now we have those pasted down. And then here we're going to have total expenses. And so there's that. Operating expenses, insurance, and property taxes are all calculated in the same manner. And so what we're going to do, and by that I mean they're all calculated based on a rentable square foot amount, and so they're all going to follow the formulas will be very similar. So we'll take the negative of the building rentable square footage, and we'll lock in that cell using the F4 key, and then multiply it by the assumptions that we have here. And then we have that. We can drag these formulas down, and I'll need to replace the bottom border here, and we can do that using Alt HBO. So we have that. The total expenses in year 0 we can calculate by using Alt equals equals to get the sum, and we see that it's equal to $710,000. Now to project the expenses, we'll use the same formula that we did for potential gross income, and that is taking the previous year's amount and multiplying by, in parentheses, and that is necessary here, 1 plus, this time not the annual rent escalation, but the annual expense escalation of 3%. Use the F4 key to lock this in, since we'll be dragging this formula across, and we want to stay fixed on this reference. Close parentheses and hit enter. And so there's our amount for year 1. We can drag this down, and then we can drag this formula across, and then Alt HBO here. That's all we need to do for the expenses. So let's drag this out to year 11. And so we have that. Now with the expenses completed, what can we do? We can go back up to our expense reimbursements line, and we can calculate it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the negative of the total expenses, and we'll multiply by the expense reimbursement assumption, which is 50%, and we have that here in cell C18. We will lock in the cell using the F4 key. And so we have that. We'll copy the formatting from here using Control C and Alt EST. And then we can drag this across. And so now effective gross income is calculated. So is total expenses. And so revenues minus expenses gives us net operating income. And so we have that. Let's copy everything that we have here, or the format rather, and then to paste the format, we'll use Alt-ES. Again, here's that paste special menu. I want the format, so we select T, and that's the letter that's underlined. We can click enter, and now we have our formatting pasted. To calculate net operating income, again, that's revenues minus expenses, so effective gross income is our revenue here. And because we're showing expenses as a cash outflow, we can add, because adding a negative subtracts. And so there we have our net operating income in year 0. Now we can drag this formula across. And so there we have our NOI projected. And why don't we take care of the low-hanging fruit? Let's calculate the going-in cap rate. The going-in cap rate we're going to calculate by taking the forward NOI. So we're purchasing the property at the end of year 0. We'll take the forward NOI, so the NOI from year 1, and divide by the acquisition price, which we have here, and hit enter. We see a value of 0, but the formula is there. We can convert this to a percentage using Control Shift and the 5 key, where you see the percentage symbol, excuse me, where you see the percentage symbol, and then Alt H0, and then Alt H0 again to see 2 decimal places. And we don't want to have this shown as blue because that will imply that it's a hard code. And so we'll change this to black font. Since that's a formula, that's exactly what we want. Now we can move on. So just like with effective gross income, I like to calculate the percentage growth for NOI. And so we'll just copy everything there and we'll paste that below. We'll do a quick check and these formulas are calculating correctly. We can also calculate the NOI margin. So I'll drag this down and I'll just change this to percent margin. And so starting in year 0, since we can calculate the margin in year 0, the growth rate we can't, since we're not going to, calculate the growth rate rather from year 0 from -1. That doesn't make sense for us. We won't worry about that. So what we'll do here is we'll take the percent margin, we'll take the net operating income, and we'll divide by the effective gross income. So there is our formula. We'll convert this to a percentage using Control Shift and the 5 key, Alt H0 to add 1 decimal place. That's all we'll do for the margin, and then Control I to italicize, and let's drag this across. And now we have a little bit more information. There's our percent margin. So now that we have that, we're ready to begin calculating the debt service. And so we'll copy the expenses header that we have here, and we'll paste this below, renaming this to debt service. And so the debt service is going to be comprised of 2 parts of the same payment. It's going to be the interest payments, the interest portion, and then the principal payments. And then that gives us the total payments. So one payment comprised of 2 components. Let's do some formatting here. Let's copy the property taxes line and the total expenses line. Control Shift to the right, Control C. And then at principal payment, Alt EST here. And that will give us the formatting that we need. So for the sake of this model, because we're in a time-constrained case study, we'll assume that there's no compounding here. We'll assume that 1 payment is made per year. We won't have any debt service payments in year 0. So starting in year 1, and the reason for that is we'll be acquiring the property at the end of year 0. So our first debt service payments will occur in year 1. And so we can use the IPMT function to calculate the interest payment. And so we'll type in equals IPMT. The first thing that we need to input is the rate. And so we will take the interest rate and we'll lock in that cell since we'll be dragging this formula across using the F4 key. The period that we're in is the year. PER is asking for the period, so we'll select the year. The number of periods is going to be the amortization. It's not the maturity. That's a mistake that people commonly make, but here we're selecting the amortization, and we definitely need to lock in that cell using the F4 key. And then finally, the present value is going to be the loan amount, and we calculated that in the sources and uses table. We'll select that, and we need the F4 key there as well to lock in that cell. We can hit close parentheses here and click enter. And so we see we have the interest payment in year one. We can use the shortcut Alt H9 and then Alt H9 again to get rid of those decimal places. And now we can repeat this process for the principal payment. Except there is a shortcut because the syntax for the IPMT function and the PPMT function, which stands for principal payment, are exactly the same. So what we'll do is we'll use the F2 key. Now that we're in the formula bar, we'll use Control A to select the entire formula, Control C, and then we can click Escape. And so now what we can do is F2 here, paste the formula that we just copied directly into the formula bar, like so. And then instead of having to reselect all of those cells, we see we have them selected. We'll change this IPMT to a PPMT, like so, and click Enter. And there we have the principal payment calculated. We can hit Alt equals equals here. And now we have our total payment calculated. The total payment will remain the same for the 10 years. The interest payment, however, will decrease over time. The principal payment will increase over time. And we actually only need 10 years here, so Control R. And the reason why we only need 10 years is because we'll be selling the property at the end of year 10, so we could actually get rid of this excess formatting that we have here using Alt-HHN and then Alt-HBN to get rid of the borders. And so there's our debt service. And so the case study also asks us to calculate the debt service coverage ratio. So here we'll type in debt service coverage ratio and in parentheses DSCR. And we'll italicize this. And then to calculate this, starting in year one, we will take the net operating income and then divide it by the negative of the total payment because we want to show this as a positive value. And so we have that. That is the right number, 1.34, but it's showing as a dollar amount. There is no shortcut that we can use to show this as a multiple, so we need to reformat the number. So what we're going to do is use Control 1 as a shortcut, and this will open up the Format Cells box. Then we'll select the number tab here, we'll select Custom, and then we'll select this option here since this is close to the end product that we want. We have this little sample here. And so to add to this, what we'll do is in quotations include a lowercase x, and then so we have it like that. And we see our sample, that's exactly what we want, so we can click OK. And there we have a formatted multiple. So we'll italicize this using Control I, and then we can drag this formula across. And so there is the debt service coverage ratio. Now we also need to track the beginning and ending debt balance for each period. And so here in cell E28, we'll type in beginning debt balance and then ending debt balance as well. We won't have a beginning debt balance in year 0 because that is when we don't acquire the property until the end of year 0. And so the ending debt balance in year 0 is going to be the loan amount because this is what a lender will be lending to us. This is what they'll be issuing to us. So we'll use these proceeds to purchase the property. The beginning debt balance in the future periods will always be equal to the ending debt balance of the previous period. So we can link directly to there and hit enter. And then the ending debt balance for all periods outside of period 0 will be calculated as the beginning debt balance minus the principal payment, and only the principal payment. It would be incorrect to select the interest payment or the total payment. Only the principal portion of the total payment, the total debt service, will reduce the debt balance. And so to subtract that, we'll add, since this is shown as a negative number. And a quick spot check shows that the debt balance is reduced over year 1, and so this looks good. We can drag this across. And that's exactly what we want. We see that the ending debt balance is declining over time due to these payments that we're making here, particularly the principal portion of the payment. And so now we're ready to calculate cash flow after debt service. And so we'll copy the net operating income line up to year 10, and we'll just paste this here, and we'll delete everything here. We'll rename this to cash flow after debt service. Then starting in year 1, we'll take the net operating income and we'll subtract the total payment. We can drag this across. And now that we have cash flow after debt service calculated, we're ready to begin calculating the unlevered cash flows. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll copy the header from debt service here, just so that way we can use that formatting and save time. And we'll paste this here. We'll rename this to unlevered cash flows. And then we'll have all of the line items that are not associated with debt here. So we have the acquisition price. We have the acquisition closing costs. And then we'll have the net operating income, the NOI. We'll have the property sale proceeds. And then we'll have the sale closing costs. We'll have a summation line here, and we'll call that total unlevered cash flows. And we'll copy the formatting from these two rows here, and then Alt-EST to paste that down here. So now starting in year 0, the acquisition price we know is 11.5 million. So we'll make sure to show that as a cash outflow by making it negative and selecting that cell. We can drag this formula down to incorporate the acquisition closing costs. And then for net operating income, we need to use an if statement here to keep this model dynamic. And so what we're going to say is if the year that we're in is less than or equal to the exit year, and we need to lock in this cell using the F4 key. We want the net operating income, that's our value if true. Otherwise, our value if false is 0. Let's copy the formatting here and Alt-EST. And now we can drag this formula across. And there we see we have net operating income going out to year 10. For property sale proceeds, we'll also need an if statement here. And so we'll say if the year that we're in is equal to the exit year, and we need to lock in that cell using the F4 key. Our value if true is going to be the forward NOI. So we're in year 1 right now. Let's select the NOI in year 2. And we'll divide by the exit cap rate assumption, which is here in cell C12, and we'll use the F4 key to lock in that cell. That's our value if true. Our value if false is going to be 0. And then close parentheses, and we can hit enter here. Let's copy the formatting and Alt-EST and paste that down. And then sale closing costs, we can be efficient with this and just take the negative of the sale proceeds and multiply it by the sale closing cost assumption. And we need the F4 key here as well to lock in the cell. Now we can drag this across. And now we have all of the unlevered cash flows calculated. So we can type in Alt == here to sum up these cash flows. And then we'll drag this formula across. And there we have total unlevered cash flows calculated. So now we're ready to calculate the unlevered returns. So we'll copy the sources and uses header, and we'll paste this here. We'll rename this to unlevered returns. And then we're going to, according to the case study, calculate the IRR, the equity multiple, we'll call this EM, and then the profit. Let's do some formatting here. Alt-HBS to add a border around. Alt-HBS here around the line items. And then Alt-HH, let's add a gray fill here. And then over here, we'll add a blue fill, so Alt-HH again. So we have that, and then we'll bold everything in this table. To calculate the IRR, we can use the IRR function, and we'll select the total unlevered cash flows. And so there's our IRR of 9%, but let's see what it looks like with two decimal places. So Alt H0 to add a decimal place, and then Alt H0 again to add another one. And so we have that. To calculate the equity multiple, the foolproof way to do so is using the SUMIF function. And we want to take the sum of all of the positive cash flows and divide it by the negative sum of the negative cash flows. And so the range that we're going to select will be the total unlevered cash flows. The criteria is going to be in quotations greater than 0. And then we can close parentheses here, and we'll divide this by a very similar looking formula. We'll say negative SUMIF. Our range is going to be those exact same cash flows. The criteria this time is going to be in quotations less than 0 to sum up the negative numbers, and then close quotations, and then we can hit enter. So there we have the equity multiple, which is $1 and 1.89. We need to format this to a multiple, so we'll use Control-1, and we'll go through the same process that we did for the debt service coverage ratio. We'll select this option here, and then open quotations, lowercase x, close quotations. We'll check our sample to see if that looks good, and it does. Now we can click OK, and there is our multiple. Finally, to calculate profit, we'll just take the sum of the total unlevered cash flows, and there is our profit on an unlevered basis. So that's it for the unlevered returns. What we can do now is copy these rows here, and we'll paste this below to calculate the levered cash flows. And we'll delete these formulas here. Let's rename this to levered cash flows. And to save us time, no need to recalculate these. We will link to the schedule above. And so now we'll have some changes. We need to incorporate the debt. So we're going to have the loan issuance here. And we have that in the sources and uses table, so we'll link directly to the debt amount. And we're showing this as a positive figure since this is money that we're getting from a lender. And so this is money coming to us. We have the origination fee, and that's the fee associated with us getting that loan to originate the loan to us, and so we'll pay that fee. And so we need to show that as a negative amount, a cash outflow. And so now that we have that, the next line item that we're going to have is not going to be net operating income, but it'll be cash flow after debt service, which takes into account the NOI minus the total debt service payment. So we'll say cash flow after debt service here. And we'll use an if statement to project this. So we'll say if the year that we're in is less than or equal to the exit year, and we'll lock in that cell. We want the cash flow after debt service, which is our value if true. Our value if false is going to be 0, and then close parentheses. Let's copy the formatting here and Alt-EST to paste that down. And so we have that. Next, we're going to have the loan repayment. And this is why we projected the debt balance, particularly the ending debt balance. And so what we're going to say here is if the year that we're in is equal to the exit year, and lock in that cell. We want the negative because we want to show this as a cash outflow. We're repaying the loan of the ending debt balance in the same year. Otherwise, give me 0. So 0 will be our value if false. Close parentheses and hit enter. Let's copy the formatting here and Alt-EST to paste that down. And now we can go up to the property sale proceeds and the sale closing costs. Actually, we'll copy these 3 line items here, these rows, and we'll paste this here. We'll delete everything that we have here. We'll also delete these formulas. And so what we're going to do here instead is we'll link directly up to property sale proceeds. and then the sale closing costs as well, since those will be the exact same numbers. Let's not forget to rename this to total levered cash flows. And now we can take these formulas that we have here and drag them across. Now let's take the sum of this and we can drag this across. And so there we have total levered cash flows calculated. Let's copy the unlevered returns. And because we built this efficiently, we can paste this here. And there we see the table updated. Now we have the levered returns calculated. And we'll make sure to call this levered returns. And now the only thing that's left for us to do here is calculate the cash on cash return. So here, we'll type in cash on cash return. And Excel is trying to be helpful to us and auto-formatted this based on what we have here, but we don't want that. So Alt-HHN to get rid of the fill, Control-B to get rid of the bolding, and then we'll Control-I to italicize this since we do want that. And so to calculate cash on cash return, we'll take the levered cash flow in year one, and we won't lock in anything here. We'll divide by the negative of the levered cash flow in year 0, and we'll lock in this cell using the F4 key. And so we have that. We'll convert this to a percentage using Control Shift and the percentage symbol, and then Alt H0, and then Control I to italicize this. And now we can drag this across. And so there we have cash on cash return. And so that looks good to go. What I like to do at the end of every model is just as a quick check. This isn't a comprehensive check, but is to make sure that when we turn off the leverage, meaning we set the LTV to 0 in this case, that the levered returns equals the unlevered returns. And so let's change the LTV to 0. And we see that that's exactly right. They are equal. Let's set this back to the case study assumption, which is 70%. And now we'll just check to make sure that we calculated everything. So we have the going cap rate here. We needed to also calculate the IRR, equity multiple, and profit for both the unlevered returns as well as the levered returns. So we have that. We needed the debt service coverage ratio, the DSCR, and then we wrapped up with calculating the annual cash on cash return, which we have down here in row 62. And so with that, we can hit Control Home to navigate back to cell A1. And now we're done with the case study and everything looks good to go. We have all of our assumptions here correctly formatted in blue text. And if we change any one of these blue text cells, such as the exit year to year 7, for example, be presented.